So if you want a community to last, you would naturally think that making it, easy and welcoming to join is the answer.
Right, yeah. You'd assume you want low barriers to entry.
Exactly. Like free coffee, no heavy demands, just come as you are.
Which is what everyone does now.
But if you look at the actual data from 19th century American communes, the exact opposite is true.
It really is.
The more grueling, strict, and physically painful you make it to belong to a group, the longer that group survives. Why is that? Welcome to today's deep dive.
It is completely counterintuitive to the modern mind. I mean, we are taught that convenience builds community, but the data just screams the opposite.
And that is exactly the kind of assumption we are tearing down today. Welcome to the Morning Roundup.
Happy to be here.
Today is Tuesday, May 19th, 2026. And, this is the daily show where we take the massive, overwhelming stack of information generated every 24 hours, articles, leaked audio, economic data, and we don't just read you the news.
No, we extract the critical insights. We try to find the hidden mechanics of how these things actually work.
Right, and thread them together into the single narrative that's defining our world right now.
And the stack on the desk today is incredibly dense. I mean, we were looking at a bizarre commencement speech at UCF that accidentally reveals the terrifying reality of the AI revolution.
Oh, that speech!
Yeah. And then we have the brutal mathematics of the 2026 housing crisis, specifically looking at Orlando.
But then it takes a hard left turn. We are diving into international intelligence networks, the use of mind control drugs on Jeffrey Epstein's island, and how the CIA actively edits Hollywood scripts to manage your perception of reality.
And from there, we are looking at the psychology of the Mandalorian, the failure of modern personal finance advice, and we're capping it off with an incredibly intense theological heavyweight fight between Eastern Orthodoxy and Protestantism.
Yeah, over what it actually takes to save your soul. Which, if you were listening to that list and thinking, what on earth does the Orlando housing market have to do with Jeffrey Epstein, Star Wars, and a first-century bishop? Stick with us.
It all connects.
It does, because when you pull back, the through line is glaringly obvious. The unifying theme of every single piece of information today is this. The intense cost of belonging in an age of systemic collapse.
Exactly. We are watching massive, unaccountable systems fail the average person. I mean, the economic math is broken. Technological paradigms are displacing human purpose.
Right.
And in response, people aren't just giving up. They're frantically migrating. They're abandoning the soft, easy systems that lied to them. And they were actively hunting for ancient paths, strict rules, and extreme personal accountability just to survive the chaos.
Yes. So let's start with the monster chasing everyone. If people are running toward these strict, difficult communities, we have to understand the economic and technological engine that is actively displacing them right now.
Right. The system's crushing us.
Exactly. And nothing captures the sheer tone-deaf absurdity of our current moment quite like this commencement speech at the University of Central Florida.
This is a perfect distillation of the elite mindset right now. So the speaker was Gloria Seifield. She is a vice president at the Tavistock Development Company.
Right, which, for those who don't know, Tavistock is a massive, multi-billion-dollar real estate firm. They build entire master plan cities for the ultra-wealthy.
Yeah.
So you have a corporate real estate executive standing at a podium, but who's she talking to? She is addressing the UCF College of Arts and Humanities.
The Nicholson School of Communication and Media.
Picture the audience. You have thousands of 22-year-old graduating writers, illustrators, journalists, animators.
You just went into immense debt.
Exactly. Spending 4 years training to execute creative cognitive tasks. And this is exactly the labor that generative AI companies are currently automating at scale.
And what is her message to this crowd of displaced creatives? She actually opens by praising Jeff Bezos as a visionary.
Of course.
And then she looks at this room full of kids staring down the barrel of unemployment, and she tells them that the rise of artificial intelligence is the next industrial revolution.
And she meant it as an inspirational rallying cry.
She really did.
But according to the breakdown we were reading, the crowd visibly and audibly started to turn on her.
Because the comparison to the Industrial Revolution is entirely accurate, but historically illiterate in its optimism.
Right.
The narrative we're fed in middle school is a clean, sanitized story of progress. We had manual farms, then someone invented the steam engine, factories popped up, and suddenly everyone was middle class and happy.
The textbook version is just, technology made things faster, so life got better.
It's sold as a triumph.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate for Seinfeld for a second. Isn't AI just a tool? Like, the tractor replaced the scythe, AI replaces the blank page. Why shouldn't they be excited about a tool that makes them faster?
Because you have to look at the mechanics of how a technological revolution actually reorganizes wealth. Let's look at the actual data from the British Industrial Revolution, roughly 1760 to 1840.
Okay.
The transition wasn't a bunch of farmers happily putting down their pitchforks to go push buttons. It was a violent, forced economic migration.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Due to things like the Enclosure Acts, people were literally fenced out of communal lands they had farmed for centuries.
So they didn't have a choice. They were starved into the cities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Entire ways of life, artisanal, community-based structures were liquidated in a single generation.
That's brutal.
Skilled craftspeople, weavers who spent decades mastering their trade, suddenly found their specialized skills completely worthless because a machine could do it 1,000 times faster.
So the human being was downgraded from an artisan to a biological cog whose only job was to keep the machine running.
Which sounds exactly like a seasoned copywriter or illustrator in 2026 being told their new job is just to write prompts for a machine.
And then fix the machine's weird mistakes. It's a massive demotion of human dignity.
And the physical toll of that 19th century transition was horrific. I mean, this wasn't a gentle adjustment period. We're talking about children as young as 5 working 12 to 16-hour shifts 6 days a week.
Because the machines didn't need breaks, so the humans weren't allowed to take them either.
Exactly. And I know you remember reading a specific data point about life expectancy during this time that completely shatters the progress narrative.
Yes, I wanted to bring this up. Between 1820 and 1870, which is right in the absolute peak of this massive explosion of industrial wealth, life expectancy in England actually stagnated.
Yep.
And in some industrial centers, it plummeted. The wealth of the nation was skyrocketing, but the people doing the work were dying younger.
Which begs the question, how does that mechanically happen? If there is more money and more goods, why are people dying faster? Because of how the wealth was captured. The factory owners didn't build adequate housing, they built slums. Rapid urbanization meant families were crammed into single rooms with no sanitation.
You had contaminated water, zero waste management, and horrific industrial pollution blocking out the sun.
Cholera and typhus ran rampant. So yes, the Industrial Revolution created unprecedented global wealth, but the distribution of that wealth was arguably the most obscene in human history up to that point.
The people who owned the machines became titans. The people who operated them earned subsistence wages that barely kept them alive.
So when a tech CEO today or a real estate executive like Seafield stands on a stage and says AI is the new industrial revolution, it's like a factory owner in 1890 walking up to a loom worker and saying, isn't this an exciting opportunity?
I have to push on this, though. When tech executives use the word progress or inevitability, isn't that just a rhetorical shield? Like, are they just actively masking the greatest wealth capture of our lifetime?
It is the exact same playbook. In the 19th century, when social reformers finally tried to pass laws limiting child labor to a 10-hour workday, the factory owners heavily lobbied against it.
Of course they did.
Their argument was that any regulation would stifle innovation, destroy the British economy, and allow foreign competitors to win.
We have to beat the French, which is exactly what tech billionaires are saying right now. We can't pause AI development or China will win.
Precisely. You can take the exact quotes from 1830s textile barons, swap out steam loom for large language model, and it sounds like a modern congressional hearing.
That is wild.
The elites used the threat of falling behind to justify a system that funneled all the newly created value directly into their own pockets. Today, tech CEOs are rapidly becoming the wealthiest humans in recorded history.
While simultaneously telling the 22-year-olds whose labor they are evaporating that this is an exciting time to be alive, it's insulting.
And the economic math of this wealth capture is already suffocating the middle class. Let's pivot to the macroeconomic data we pulled regarding the 2026 housing market.
Yes, because this is where the rubber meets the road for you, the listener. This is where the macro trend ruins your Tuesday.
The housing data provides a terrifying snapshot of how far purchasing power has collapsed. Let's look at the ratio of U.S. home prices to median household income. In 1985, that ratio was roughly 3.1.
Okay, let's explain that clearly. That means if your family made $50,000 a year, the average house cost about $150,000.
Right.
You could reasonably save for a down payment, and the mortgage wouldn't completely eat your life.
Correct. But by the end of 2025, moving into 2026, That ratio had spiked to 5.1. The cost of a home is now more than 5 times the median income.
That is not a small shift. That is a fundamental rewriting of the American timeline.
It absolutely is. In the 1980s, the median age of a first-time homebuyer was 29. Today, it has skyrocketed to 40. The current data shows that 65% of all American households, mathematically, cannot afford a newly built, median-priced home. Not that they don't want to. They literally cannot qualify for the debt required to buy it.
I want to zoom in on a hyper-local example because sweeping national statistics can feel abstract. We have a breakdown of exactly what this looks like in Orlando, Florida right now, using the golden rule of personal finance, at the 50-30-20 rule.
The 50-30-20 rule is the standard metric taught by every financial advisor for decades.
Right.
You take your after-tax income and you allocate 50% to your absolute needs, housing, groceries, utilities, health insurance.
Yeah.
Put 30% toward wants, entertainment, dining out, and 20% goes to savings or aggressively paying down debt.
It's the blueprint for a responsible middle-class life. So what happens when you apply that blueprint to Orlando in 2026?
The system breaks. The average monthly household income in Orlando is calculated to be roughly $3,337 after taxes. If you are a responsible adult and you allocate exactly 50% of that to your needs, your entire budget for that category is about $1,670 a month.
And wait, that $1,670 isn't just rent. That has to cover your car insurance, your electric bill, your groceries, your water bill.
Correct. But even if you threw every single penny of that strictly at rent in Orlando right now, that barely secures a standard one-bedroom apartment in a safe area.
And we are talking about the household average. We are not talking about a 19-year-old barista fresh out of high school.
No.
We are talking about established adults, sometimes dual income couples on the lower end, where their entire needs budget can't even put a roof over their heads without bleeding into the 30% they're supposed to spend on living or the 20% they desperately need to save for the future.
Mechanics-wise, what happens is a slow, agonizing slide into perpetual debt. Because rent takes 60 or 70% of their income, the needs category overflows.
So they stop saving the 20%.
Exactly, which means they have no emergency fund. When the car breaks down, it goes on a credit card at 24% interest. The math guarantees they will never build equity.
This destroys the entire cultural script we've been handed. We have this deeply ingrained societal expectation that success looks like moving out of your parents' house at 18 or 21, getting your own pristine apartment, and being completely independent.
But the math says that individualistic dream is dead.
It is mathematically obsolete for the majority. We are being forced to return to much older historical modes of living.
The data shows a massive rise in multi-generational households. Grandparents, parents, and adult children, all pooling resources under one roof.
Or we see adults in their late 20s and 30s having 3 or 4 roommates just to rent a house together.
The nuclear, isolated young professional is becoming a luxury of the upper class.
And the brutal reality is that it isn't just greedy landlords causing this. If you look at the geopolitical and intelligence analysis we've pulled, this localized housing pain is directly connected to the systemic collapse of fiat currency itself.
That is the deeper mechanical layer. A fiat currency is money that has no intrinsic value. It isn't backed by physical gold or silver. It only has value by government decree.
Right.
The historical analysis presented in these geopolitical circles makes a chilling point. In the thousands of years of human economic history, the survival rate of fiat currencies is exactly 0. Every single one has eventually collapsed.
Wait, 100% failure rate. Why? What is the mechanism that always kills it?
The mechanism is human nature combined with political pressure. When a government can print money out of thin air to fund wars, pay off debts, or stimulate a lagging economy, the temptation is always too great.
They always print more.
They always print more. And when you increase the supply of dollars without increasing the actual goods and services in the economy, every existing dollar loses purchasing power. That is inflation.
Inflation isn't prices going up. It is the value of your money going down.
Exactly.
So going off the gold standard in 1971 essentially removed the speed limit on the money printers.
Exactly. And over the last few years, we have seen unprecedented multi-trillion-dollar expansions of the money supply. So when you look at a house in Orlando and think, wow, real estate went up, you are looking at it backward.
The house didn't change.
The house didn't change.
Yeah.
The value of the dollars in your bank account collapsed. Real estate is just acting as a sponge, soaking up all the devalued currency.
This is an incredibly bleak picture. Your money is mathematically leading value while it sits in the bank. Housing is functionally walled off from you. And on top of all of that, the AI revolution is threatening your ability to earn that devalued money in the first place.
And we are seeing the corporate execution of this right now. The tech sector analysis highlights that Amazon Web Services, AWS, recently replaced 16,000 human workers, integrating AI into their core operations.
But again, people think AI is just for writing emails or generating weird pictures with 6 fingers. But it is rapidly climbing the cognitive ladder, right?
It is moving from generative to agentic. The analysis points to the legal field as the next major domino. AI models are passing the bar exam in the 90th percentile.
Wow.
We are looking at a near future where human paralegals who sift through case law and draft briefs are entirely obsolete. It costs a law firm a fraction of a penny to have an AI do in 10 seconds what a junior associate does in 40 hours.
And the analysis even touched on something deeply dystopian, the push for AI judges or juries.
Yes, the technocratic argument is already forming. They argue that human judges are tired, hungry, and emotionally biased, whereas an AI model trained on perfect case law would deliver cold, objective justice.
But the mechanical reality is that it completely removes human empathy, context, and mercy from the justice system. It turns the legal system into a literal algorithm.
It does.
Okay, so let's synthesize this for a second. The visible economy is a rigged casino. The chips you're playing with are losing value every day. The entry fee to get a house is astronomically high, and the dealer is actively replacing you with a machine.
That's a good way to put it.
If this system is bleeding the middle class dry, the natural question is, who owns the casino? Who is actually running these systems, and how on earth are they keeping 300 million Americans pacified while they extract all the wealth?
That transitions us beautifully from the visible mathematical economy to the invisible shadow systems of power.
Yes.
And the intelligence sources we reviewed today take an unflinching look at how elite control is maintained, specifically through blackmail and mass psychological manipulation.
I want to spend significant time on this interview breakdown from Jay's analysis. This is an incredibly deep dive into the Jeffrey Epstein files, the CIA, and global intelligence networks.
It's heavy stuff.
It is. And what strikes me here is that 5 years ago, talking about Epstein was considered fringe conspiracy theory. But now, the source material is documented. We are looking at court records and flight logs.
Right.
We are not talking about a lone, sick billionaire. We're looking at an industrial-level international political fixing operation. Now, just to remind everyone, our mandate is to just unpack the sources without endorsing the politics. But this is fascinating.
To understand the mechanics of Epstein, you have to stop looking at him as a financier and start looking at him as an intelligence asset running a compromat operation. Compromat is the Russian term for compromising material. The specific details in this analysis are staggering. For instance, the revelation that Jeffrey Epstein was giving high-level tours and explaining the intricate inner workings of the Vatican Bank to people like Larry Summers, the former Harvard president, and Clinton Treasury Secretary.
Which makes zero sense. Why would a guy whose official story is just New York math teacher turned wealth manager have intimate operational knowledge of the Vatican Bank's international routing systems? He wouldn't, unless he was deeply embedded in state-level intelligence apparatuses. The analysis points to an interview with Steve Bannon, who explicitly stated that Epstein was recruited into the Trilateral Commission when he was only 30 years old.
For the listener, what is the Trilateral Commission and why does a 30-year-old Epstein getting in matter?
The Trilateral Commission is a non-governmental organization founded in 1973 by David Rockefeller. It brings together the absolute highest-level political and business elites from North America, Europe, and Asia.
It's the definition of the global shadow elite.
Exactly. You don't just walk in at age 30 because you have some money. You are brought in. Bannon alleged Epstein was brought into this network by the Kissinger and Rockefeller circles. He was groomed for a specific utility.
And that utility was the island, the honey trap. But this wasn't just hidden cameras in bedrooms. The analysis mentioned the discovery of scopolamine on Epstein's properties, which absolutely blew my mind.
It's terrifying.
What is scopolamine and how does it change the narrative? Scopolamine is a naturally occurring tropane alkaloid, often extracted from the borcaro tree in South America. On the streets of Colombia, it is known as devil's breath.
Devil's breath.
From a neurological standpoint, it is terrifying. It acts as an anticholinergic agent that blocks receptors in the brain, essentially severing the connection between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex.
In English, what does that actually do to a person?
It completely eradicates free will and memory formation while leaving the person physically conscious and articulate.
Wait, really?
Yes, if you blow scopolamine powder into someone's face, within minutes they become completely compliant. You could tell them to go to the ATM, empty their bank account, and hand you the cash, and they will do it with a blank smile.
Oh my gosh.
And the next day, they will have total amnesia of the event.
And this isn't just street lore. The CIA studied this heavily, didn't they?
Extensively.
Yeah.
During the 1950s and 60s, the CIA ran Project MK-Ultra, an illegal human experimentation program designed to identify and develop drugs for use in interrogations and mind control. Scopolamine was a primary subject of study because the holy grail of intelligence work is a drug that produces perfect compliance and perfect amnesia.
So if Epstein is in possession of MK Ultra level compliance drugs, this completely obliterates the narrative that he was just running a high-end prostitution ring for his rich buddies.
Completely.
This was a sophisticated, state-sponsored entrapment operation. You drug a senator, a CEO, or a foreign dignitary, you film them doing something horrific, and now you own their voting record. You own their corporate policy. The shadow system controls the visible system via blackmail.
Exactly. It creates a matrix of perfect compliance among the elite class. They cannot act against the system because the system holds the tape.
Okay, so that explains how they control the people at the top. But how do they control the bottom? How do you keep the average guy in Orlando who can't afford rent and is losing his job to a chatbot from rioting?
This brings us to the propaganda wing of the shadow system, Hollywood.
Ah.
The intelligence analysis transitions into the systemic ties between Western intelligence, the CIA, MI6, the Mossad, and the mass media entertainment complex. The primary text they cite is a deeply researched book called Operation Hollywood, which details the entertainment liaison offices run by the Department of Defense and the CIA.
I think people vaguely know that the military helps out with movies. Like, if you want a fighter jet in your movie, you call the Pentagon.
Yes, but the mechanic of how that help is given is outright censorship and narrative control. If a studio wants to use an aircraft carrier for the new Top Gun or Transformers, the DoD demands total script approval.
So they read the script first.
Yes, and if there is a character who is a corrupt general, or if the military is shown making a catastrophic moral error, the DoD will explicitly cross out those lines and rewrite the script to ensure the military is portrayed as hyper-competent and morally pure.
And if the director refuses?
They lose the equipment, and the movie budget balloons by tens of millions of dollars.
So the financial incentive forces Hollywood to become a PR firm for the intelligence apparatus. But the analysis goes even deeper than just making the CIA look cool in movies like Argo. It gets into the intentional psychological reshaping of the public's values.
This is where we look at the specific texts used by these elite circles. The analysis highlights a 1982 textbook titled Changing Images of Man.
I had never heard of this book. Where did it come from?
It was essentially a massive study conducted by the Stanford Research Institute intended for high-level academics, policymakers, and intelligence operatives. Interestingly, it was published by Pergamon Press.
Let me stop you there, because the name connection is wild.
Yeah.
Pergamon Press was owned by Robert Maxwell, right?
Yes. Robert Maxwell was a British media mogul and a known associate of multiple intelligence agencies, primarily the Mossad.
Oh.
He is also the father of Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's partner, and the procurer for his honey trap operation.
It is one massive, incestuous web. So you have a publishing house with deep intelligence ties putting out a textbook for elites on how to change the image of man. What are the actual mechanics proposed in this book? How do they suggest changing society?
The analysis argues that the book acts as a blueprint for mass psychological warfare. One of the core strategies outlined is the intentional inversion of traditional gender roles and the dismantling of patriarchal family-centric structures through mass media.
Why, though? What does an intelligence agency care about gender roles? Why not just let people live?
Because of where power naturally accumulates. A strong, cohesive nuclear family with clearly defined roles and deep community roots is incredibly difficult for a centralized state to control.
They don't need the state. They rely on each other.
Exactly. However, if you use mass media, television, music, movies to aggressively promote extreme individualism, blur biological realities, and frame the traditional family as an oppressive prison, you atomize the population.
You break them down into isolated, confused individuals.
Right. And an isolated, atomized individual who has no strong family structure, no inherited traditions, and no cohesive community is entirely dependent on the centralized state and corporate power for their identity, their protection, and their survival.
They become perfectly malleable consumers and compliant citizens.
Yes.
This is terrifying because it implies that the culture wars we fight every day on social media aren't organic disagreements, they are engineered distractions.
Okay.
Which leads me to a major point of frustration. If this matrix of control is so obvious, if the economy is a trap and the media is a curated psyop, why are the people who claim to be fighting the system failing so miserably?
You were asking about the failure of the mainstream cultural resistance.
Yeah.
And that leads us to Oren McIntyre's brutal critique of the intellectual dark web, or the IDW.
Yes. For context, around 2015, this group of podcasters and academics, people like Dave Rubin, Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris, and Joe Rogan, were dubbed the intellectual dark web. They became massively popular by pushing back against woke overreach and defending free speech. McIntyre specifically reviews a recent 2026 interview between Dave Rubin and Bishop Robert Barron.
And McIntyre's thesis is that watching these two men talk in 2026 is like cracking open a time capsule from 2015. It is completely stagnant.
He argues that they're completely missing the plot. They're still using the exact same playbook from 10 years ago. They sit in nice studios, wearing nice suits, and they politely debate about how the far left is being a bit unreasonable and how we just need to return to classical liberalism and the marketplace of ideas.
The mechanical flaw in their strategy is a failure to recognize the shift in power. Classical liberalism relies on the idea of a neutral public square where all ideas can compete fairly and the best idea wins.
Right.
McIntyre points out that the neutral public square no longer exists. The institutions, the universities, the corporate HR departments, the legacy media, and the intelligence agencies we just discussed have been entirely captured by one specific ideological framework.
It's like the IDW guys showed up to a knife fight carrying a debate podium. They are arguing about the rules of the game while the other side owns the scoreboard and the referees.
That's exactly it.
McIntyre says it's useless to defend the marketplace of ideas when the market has already been bought by BlackRock and the CIA. The cultural paradigm has shifted beneath their feet. The right has splintered, the left has consolidated institutional power, and just talking politely about free speech is an obsolete tactic.
And this realization that polite conversation and soft, moderate resistance is completely failing to stop the collapse is exactly what is driving the massive cultural shift we are seeing at the grassroots level.
People are abandoning the polite debate club.
They are. They are actively seeking out fierce, uncompromising personal accountability.
They want blood, sweat, and rules. Which brings us to the critique of Dave Ramsey from the Layman's Journal. This is such a visceral example of the old, soft expectations clashing with the new demand for brutal accountability.
Dave Ramsey is arguably the most famous personal finance personality in America. He built an empire on folksy, straightforward financial advice. But this specific call, highlighted in the source, reveals a massive generational and economic disconnect.
Let's lay out the scenario because the caller's situation is fascinating. A young woman calls Ramsey's show. She is living with her boyfriend.
Okay.
The boyfriend is highly successful. He makes $250,000 a year. He is currently paying 100% of their shared rent and living expenses so that she can take her entire paycheck and throw it at a mountain of personal debt she accumulated before they met.
It is an incredibly generous arrangement on his part.
But there is a catch. The caller is upset because the boyfriend refuses to propose to her until she is completely 100% debt-free. She feels like he is holding the relationship hostage.
And Dave Ramsey's response to this is telling. He sides completely with the caller. He calls her a princess who deserves better.
Yeah. He characterizes the boyfriend as manipulative, controlling, and accuses him of trying to buy his way into a marriage. Ramsey explicitly tells the woman to pack her bags and dump the guy.
The breakdown from Layman's Journal goes absolutely ballistic on Ramsey for this advice. The creator points out that from a mechanical, legal, and mathematical standpoint, the boyfriend is acting with perfect rational responsibility.
Let's look at the legal mechanics. When you marry someone, depending on your state's laws, you are legally yoking yourself to their financial history.
Right. If he marries her while she's drowning in debt, her debt functionally becomes a liability on his balance sheet.
Right.
He's protecting his hard-earned assets.
Exactly. And he isn't just abandoning her, he is actively subsidizing her life so she can fix her own mess. He is saying, I will provide the safety net, but you have to do the work to show me you have the financial discipline required for a lifelong partnership.
The critique diagnoses Ramsey's bad advice as a symptom of the boomer economy mindset. Ramsey grew up during the post-WWII economic boom, the largest expansion of middle-class wealth in human history.
The source said upward mobility worked like gravity. It was effortless.
Precisely. In that era, a high school diploma, a sensible haircut, and showing up on time guaranteed a 40-year career, a pension, and a house.
The economic system was so flush with cash that it forgave a massive amount of personal incompetence.
You could be bad with money and still end up okay because the rising tide lifted all boats.
But that tide went out. The 2026 economy we just talked about, the 50-30-20 housing crisis, does not forgive mistakes. If you enter a marriage with massive consumer debt today, it can literally sink the family permanently.
The critique argues that Ramsey is enabling a total lack of accountability. By demonizing the responsible man who is demanding discipline, Ramsey is coddling the woman's incompetence.
And the source makes a very sharp sociological observation.
They do. They observe that this brand of soft, therapeutic advice systematically keeps women single and dependent. Instead of submitting to the hard accountability required to build a real-world partnership, they are told they are princesses, and they retreat into the arms of the internet or church infrastructures that require nothing of them.
It is a total rejection of victimhood. And this exact same hunger for brutal, uncompromising standards ties directly into the source we have discussing DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the concept of equality of outcome.
We reviewed an analysis of a political memo regarding the dismantling of DEI programs. What stood out wasn't just the political maneuvering, but the philosophical rejection of equality of outcome and a valid metric for a healthy society.
For a long time, the cultural narrative was that if different groups didn't have the exact same representation in every field, the system was inherently evil and had to be torn down. Equality of outcome was the holy grail.
But the pushback we are seeing now is viciously meritocratic.
The quote pulled from this analysis is essentially a slap in the face to modern sociological theories. You have the same 24 hours as everyone else. What have you done with your time?
It strips away all the excuses. It completely ignores systemic arguments. It looks at the individual and says, I don't care if the system is rigged. The system being rigged doesn't pay your rent. What are you personally doing to fix your life?
It is a demand for radical, almost painful personal agency.
And we see this exact same demand for hard stakes playing out in the religious sphere, specifically regarding the crisis of single men abandoning the modern church.
The Faith and Dating Explained piece really hit me hard. The data is clear. Single young men are checking out of modern evangelical and mainstream churches in droves. Why?
The source argues that these men are leaving because the modern church has adopted the exact same soft, therapeutic, talk-only model that Aaron McIntyre criticized in the IDW.
Men are being subjected to endless discussion circles with absolutely no game plan.
Exactly. The modern community group model is entirely biased toward emotional processing. You sit in a circle, you drink coffee, you talk about your week, you share your feelings, and then you go home.
And the source notes that while emotional processing is fine, the masculine psychology is fundamentally different. Men bond through shared hardship and shared mission.
The analogy they used was brilliant. Think of a military unit or a football team. Do they hold meetings? Yes, constantly.
But do they sit in those meetings and talk about their feelings and how hard the last game was? No. They watch the film, they study the opponent, they draw up the plays, and they train for the execution of the next operation.
The meeting exists strictly to facilitate a real-world action.
But the modern church, according to this critique, trains men for no meaningful assignment. They are told to be good guys, don't look at porn, and show up on Sunday. There is no grand mission.
Why is modern society, and frankly the modern church, so terrified of handing men actual responsibility? The source argues that these men are starving for an assignment with consequences.
They want to be handed something dangerous. They want the Great Commission. They want to be told, go evangelize this neighborhood, go disciple these teenagers, build this infrastructure, and if you fail, people will actually suffer.
Mechanics-wise, when you remove consequence, you remove urgency. When you remove urgency, you destroy a man's motivation to improve. He gets bored.
And a bored man will walk away from a soft circle to go find a hard wall to climb.
Okay, so if the soft expectations of the boomer economy are dead, if the victimhood of DEI is being rejected, and if the therapeutic talk-only communities are failing to retain anyone, what actually works?
Where do people find the structure and the meaning they're desperately craving?
We find the mechanical answer to that question in the most unexpected place imaginable. A galaxy far, far away, backed by rigorous, peer-reviewed anthropology.
This is my favorite part of the deep dive. The religion for breakfast source. We are talking about Star Wars, specifically The Mandalorian and the fanatic religious faction within the show known as the Children of the Watch.
For the casual viewer, the Mandalorians who refuse to ever take off their helmets and constantly chant, "This is the way," are just a cool sci-fi trope. It looks awesome on screen.
But to an anthropologist of religion, it is a flawless masterclass in the mechanics of how human communities survive under extreme pressure.
The core question the source asks is, why does a guy refusing to take off a metal bucket resonate so deeply with the human psyche? Why are millions of people watching this and feeling a weird sense of admiration for rules that are objectively insane?
To answer that, the source unpacks a landmark 2003 study by anthropologists Richard Sosis and Eric Bressler. They wanted to know what makes a utopian community survive.
Right, so they analyzed 83 different 19th century American communes. Some were secular, built on socialist or egalitarian ideals. Some were deeply religious.
The methodology was brilliant. Sosis and Bressler went through the historical records of these communes and coded them based on the number of costly requirements they demanded from their members.
Give me some examples of these requirements.
We are talking about extreme demands, strict, bizarre dietary restrictions, severe, uncomfortable dress codes, mandatory celibacy, cutting off all contact with your outside family.
Or the ultimate cost, forcing new members to surrender 100% of their personal property and wealth to the commune upon entry.
The modern rational mind looks at that list and says, that's a cult. Who would ever join that? If you make the rules that painful, the community will collapse instantly because everyone will leave.
But the data prove the exact opposite. The numbers are staggering. The secular communes, which generally had very few rules and focused on easy cooperation, lasted an average of only 5 years before tearing themselves apart.
5 years, that's nothing.
But the religious communes, the ones that imposed these massive, painful costs, lasted a median of 25 years. And the mean difference was even wider, under 8 years for secular versus 36 years for religious.
Furthermore, the correlation was linear. Within the religious communes, the more strict the rules were, the longer the community survived.
Strictness works. But mechanics-wise, why? How does making life miserable make the group stronger?
The source explains this through an economic concept called the free rider problem, which is mitigated by what sociologists call the strict church model.
Walk me through the free rider problem.
In any community where individuals pool their resources, whether it's growing food together, sharing wealth, or providing mutual emotional support, there is an overwhelming evolutionary incentive for an individual to cheat the system.
A free rider wants to take the benefits of the community without paying the cost of contributing.
It's the guy who always shows up to eat the pizza but conveniently forgets his wallet every time the bill comes.
Precisely. And if a commune has too many free riders, the actual producers get exhausted, the resources are drained, and the community collapses. So how do you filter out the free riders before they even get in?
You impose a massive upfront cost that provides absolutely no rational benefit to an outsider.
Exactly. You make them wear heavy, uncomfortable clothing in the summer. You make them give up their bank accounts.
Or, in the case of the Mandalorian, you demand that they never, ever remove their heavy metal helmet in the presence of another living being, which makes eating, drinking,
an easy meal. We'll look at that rule, say, you guys are crazy, that's not worth it, and walk away.
The strictness is an intentional filter. It guarantees that every single person left standing inside the room is a true fanatic. They all have skin in the game. You look around and you know you can trust the guy next to you because you both paid the same ridiculous price to be there.
But the anthropological analysis goes one step further. Filtering adults is one thing. But how do you pass that intense fanatic belief down to the next generation? How do you make a child believe?
This is where the concept of CRADs comes in. Credibility-enhancing displays. I am obsessed with this idea.
It comes from the anthropologist Joseph Henrich. He posits that humans have evolved a very specific social learning mechanism to protect ourselves from liars. Children are biologically hardwired to ignore what adults say.
They only learn what to believe based on what they watch adults visibly pay a cost for.
Words are cheap. Talk is cheap. Action is expensive.
The source applies this to the Mandalorian foundlings. A child adopted into this cult believes the creed is real, not because the adults sit them in a circle and recite, "This is the way."
Right.
The child believes it is real because he watches his father figure sacrifice every ordinary human, comfort eating in solitude, sweating in armor, risking his life for the clan every single day for years.
The sheer, unbearable weight of the adult sacrifice forcefully transmits the conviction into the child's mind. The adult demonstrates the cost, so the child absorbs the belief.
And the inverse is terrifyingly true. If Syrids build belief, what destroys it? The source brings up a 2022 study by Kirpin and Willard analyzing the catastrophic collapse of the Catholic Church in Ireland.
They studied what happens when a culture is exposed to anti-CREDs.
And anti-Sarah is essentially hypocrisy. It's telling your kids the tap water is perfectly safe to drink, while you secretly order cases of expensive bottled water for yourself. The kid watches your action, realizes the words are a lie, and instantly stops trusting the tap water.
In Ireland, the church demanded immense moral and financial costs from the population for centuries. But when the systemic institutional hypocrisy, the horrific abuse, and the subsequent cover-ups were exposed, it acted as a massive societal anti-Asserid.
The leadership was completely unwilling to pay the moral cost they demanded of the laity.
When the costliness was revealed to be a cynical lie, the belief system of the entire nation shattered almost overnight.
Because true survival of a creed requires unbearable, highly visible, and sincere commitment from the top down. Which brings us to the grand finale of this deep dive.
This hardwired psychological need for strict structures, for visible CREDs, and for uncompromising accountability perfectly explains the massive modern phenomenon of young people abandoning soft, therapeutic modern churches and migrating toward incredibly ancient, strict liturgical faiths.
They want the heavy armor. They want the fasts. They want the rules. And that brings us to the intense theological debate in our sources today between Eastern Orthodoxy and Protestantism.
We reviewed several sources unpacking a heavyweight theological clash. Defending Eastern Orthodoxy is Craig Triglia, a man who actually converted from Protestantism to Orthodoxy. Defending Reformed Baptist Protestantism is Pastor Sam Farag, who converted from Oriental Orthodoxy to Protestantism.
So these two men intimately know the terrain of the other side. There are no straw man arguments here. Let's look at Truglia's opening salvo. His historical and biblical argument for Eastern Orthodoxy centers on one non-negotiable mechanic:
apostolic succession. Truglia argues that the early church was strictly and exclusively episcopal, meaning it was governed by a visible hierarchy of bishops who were directly, physically ordained by the apostles, who were in turn ordained by Christ himself.
It is an unbroken chain of physical laying on of hands across 2 millennia.
He backs this up biblically, pointing to Acts chapter 14, where Paul and Barnabas intentionally appoint presbyters, elders in every single church they plant. And he points to the epistle to Titus, where Paul explicitly commands Titus to go to Crete and appoint elders in every city to establish order.
Truglia also brings in heavy extra-biblical early church history to prove that this succession was intentional. He cites 1 Clement chapter 44.
Stop and explain 1 Clement for the listener, because that isn't in the Bible.
Right. 1 Clement is a letter written by Clement, the Bishop of Rome, right around the end of the 1st century, perhaps 95 AD. It is one of the earliest Christian documents outside the New Testament.
In chapter 44, Clement explicitly states that the apostles had perfect foreknowledge that there would be massive strife and political infighting over the office of the bishop. Because they knew this, they established a clear, unalterable rule of succession, so that when they died, other approved men would seamlessly take over their ministry.
So Truglia takes that historical reality and raises the stakes to the absolute maximum. He argues that to be outside of this visible, historically delineated physical church structure is a damnable schism.
He cites Galatians 5.19-21, where the Apostle Paul lists the works of the flesh, things like murder, adultery, and witchcraft, and states that those who do these things will not inherit the kingdom of God.
Right in the middle of that list of heinous sins is the word sects, or heresies.
Truglia argues that breaking away from the physical line of apostolic bishops to start your own independent church makes you a sect, which puts your salvation in direct jeopardy.
That is a terrifying claim. He is saying, I don't care how much you love Jesus, if your pastor doesn't have the literal historical paperwork tracing back to Peter or Paul, you are outside the ark of salvation.
But Pastor Sam Farag pushes back hard against this, wielding the foundational sword of the Protestant Reformation. Sola Scriptura. The doctrine that Scripture alone is the final infallible authority for the Christian, not church tradition or the decrees of bishops.
Farag challenges the entire premise of an unbroken episcopal line in Rome by pointing to the Book of Romans. Paul writes this massive theological letter to the church in Rome, but Paul states elsewhere that he makes it a strict rule not to build on another man's foundation.
Farag argues the mechanics of this. If Peter, the chief apostle, had already been in Rome establishing a formal bishopric, Paul wouldn't be writing to them in this foundational way, because that would violate his rule of not building it on another apostle's turf.
Farag uses this to argue that the Roman Church was likely organic, established by regular Jewish believers returning from the day of Pentecost, not by a formal top-down apostolic plan.
Therefore, Farag argues, succession isn't about an unbroken line of physical ordinations and bureaucracy. It's about faithfulness to the Word of God. A church is true not because of its pedigree, but because it preaches the true gospel.
And this is where Farag goes on the offensive. He argues that Eastern Orthodoxy has fundamentally deviated from the biblical gospel by mandating extra-biblical traditions, most specifically the veneration of icons.
Farag argues that the moment you require a believer to bow to an icon or pray to a saint as a mandatory part of their religious life, you have added a human work to the finished work of Christ.
And adding works to grace makes it a different gospel entirely, which falls under Paul's curse in Galatians 1.
The debate reaches its absolute boiling point when they delve into differing views on monasticism and asceticism. The source highlights a specific, incredibly famous Eastern Orthodox text called the Ladder of Divine Ascent.
Written by St. John Climacus.
Yes, this is not a fringe book. It is a foundational spiritual text read annually in Orthodox monasteries during Lent. It outlines the grueling spiritual steps required to achieve union with God.
And Farag reads it, and he is utterly horrified. He points to passages where monks are described enduring horrific psychological abuse from their superiors, monks beating their chests until they literally cough up blood, monks praying to be actively possessed by demons as a form of ultimate humiliating punishment for their sins.
Farag looks at this and says, "This is madness. This looks like pagan self-mutilation, entirely divorced from the joy and freedom Christ and the apostles taught."
But Treblia defends the text, pointing out that modern Westerners completely misunderstand the mechanics of ascetic literature. He suggests these extreme accounts might be hagiographic exaggeration stylized, mythic storytelling meant to convey the deep internal, authentic struggle of repentance rather than literal historical instructions.
He also points back to the biblical precedent, right? The parable of the publican and the Pharisee. The publican who is justified by God physically beats his breast in grief over his sin.
Exactly. For the Orthodox, these extreme ascetic practices, the fasting, the prostrations, the grueling vigils, are precision tools designed to break human pride and cultivate true, crushing humility. The Orthodox view works not as a legalistic checklist opposed to faith, but as a faith performance enhancer.
You do the physical work to force the spiritual reality.
To bring some balance to this intense binary, we have a source from Dr. Jordan B. Cooper, a brilliant Lutheran theologian, reacting to the overarching claim made by many online Orthodox apologists that Eastern Orthodoxy is the exact, unchanged replica of the early Church.
Cooper pushes back heavily on the Orthodox narrative of static, unchanging tradition. He notes that if you actually read the earliest church fathers, like Justin Martyr in the 2nd century, you find theology that would be considered heretical by later Orthodox standards.
Specifically, subordinationist views on the Trinity.
Right. Subordinationism is the belief that God the Son is somehow lesser in nature or strictly subordinate to God the Father. Justin Martyr's writings lean heavily in this direction. This was before the church councils hammered out the precise Orthodox language of the Trinity at Nicaea. Cooper's point is that theology developed. It wasn't handed down perfectly formulated in 33 AD.
Cooper also attacks the aesthetic claim. You walk into an Orthodox liturgy with the chanting and the incense, and you are told this is exactly how the early Christians worshipped. But Cooper points to early homilies by towering figures like John Chrysostom.
Chrysostom was known as the golden-mouthed preacher of late antiquity. Cooper notes that Chrysostom's sermons were heavily expository.
Meaning he opened the Bible, read a verse, and explained exactly what the text meant, line by line.
Yes. Cooper argues that reading a Chrysostom homily feels mechanically much closer to a modern Protestant expository sermon than to the highly stylized, tradition-focused moralizing that often dominates modern Orthodox homilies.
Which highlights a fundamental divergence in how these two traditions view the biblical text itself.
Yeah.
And on the topic of how to actually view the text, we have the brilliant paradigm-shifting insight from the late Dr. Michael Heiser.
Heiser was a Semitic scholar who argued that modern Christians, both Protestant and Orthodox, often completely misunderstand the Bible because they try to read it like a modern history textbook or a legal manual. Heiser argues that to truly understand the text, you have to read it like a novel. Read it like fiction.
No, wait. He explicitly says he does not mean the Bible is fake or made up.
Correct. He means you should apply the exact same cognitive alertness to the Bible that you use when you read a high-level piece of literature. When you read a great novel, you know the author is a genius. If they mention a specific type of tree in Chapter 1 or introduce a weirdly named minor character in Chapter 4, you know it's not an accident.
They're intentionally placing motifs and recurring symbols because they want you to connect the dots in Chapter 20.
Exactly. Heiser points out that the biblical writers were ancient literary geniuses. They weren't just recording dry history. They were embedding profound truth propositions into the text using brilliant literary patterns.
By obsessing over modern historical grammatical debates, we miss the transcendent cosmic truths God was communicating through the ancient Near Eastern culture.
But regardless of whether you adopt the intricate literary view of Heiser, the rigorous expository view of the Protestants, or the deep liturgical asceticism of the Orthodox, all of these paths ultimately demand one identical, terrifying mechanic: the total transformation and purification of the human mind.
Which is beautifully captured in our final piece of source material, a brief, striking excerpt from a sermon at St. Nectarius Orthodox Church on the concept of love without expectation.
The priest delivers a devastatingly simple mechanical truth. He argues that you cannot expect to have peace in your soul, purity in your life, or love in your marriage if you are constantly consuming the filth of a collapsing culture.
He gets incredibly specific. He says if you spend your week watching hyper-violent movies, playing horrific, blood-soaked video games, and consuming dirty, sexualized media, that corruption does not stay on the screen.
It mechanically bleeds into your soul. It rewires your dopamine. It actively destroys your ability to be gentle with your spouse or patient with your children.
To be pure, as the Apostle Paul commands in Philippians 4, you have to intentionally concentrate your mind on things that are excellent, lovely, and holy. You have to actively defend your own psychology from the matrix we discussed earlier.
It all comes roaring back to the concept of costly signaling. Choosing to turn off the screen when you are tired and want to zone out, choosing to read the dense text, choosing to protect your mind, that is a CR ed.
That is a credibility-enhancing display. You are proving to yourself and your family watching you that you actually believe the creed you claim to hold.
So let's pull all of this together and synthesize this massive web of information. We are living in an era where the visible, soft systems are actively collapsing.
The economic math of the housing market is broken, locking out a generation. Artificial intelligence is climbing the cognitive ladder, accelerating the displacement of human purpose. Fiat currencies are mathematically doomed to inflate away your life savings.
And the invisible systems, the geopolitical elites running honey traps like Epstein, and the intelligence-backed media apparatus editing your reality are actively working to keep the population atomized, distracted, and malleable.
But the antidote to this systemic whiplash is not to sit in a studio and politely complain about it, like the stagnant intellectual dark web.
The antidote is radical, painful, personal accountability. Stop waiting for the system to save you, because the system is designed to extract from you. Embrace costly signaling. Filter out the free riders in your life, and commit yourself to a strict, hard, mission-driven existence.
The people who survive the collapse of the soft systems are the ones who have already built hard, uncompromising systems internally.
And that brings us to the most important part of the show. We don't just dump this terrifying information on you and leave you to panic. Our mandate is to give you the action plan.
Here are your 3 practical, actionable steps based on the mechanics we uncovered in today's deep dive. Number 1, audit your systems immediately. Look at your life through the brutal lens of the 50-30-20 budget.
If the math of your city like Orlando is crushing you, stop waiting for the housing market to magically return to 1985. It won't. Break the societal norms. Swallow your pride. Look into multi-generational living. Get 3 roommates. Move to a cheaper state. And aggressively build wealth the boring, painful way. You have to survive the math first.
Number 2, find your CREDs. If you are trying to lead a family, build a business, or establish a community, stop talking. Words are useless. Establish credibility-enhancing displays. Make your convictions visibly, undeniably costly to yourself. Put down the phone, turn off the media, embrace the discomfort, and live out your creed so clearly that the next generation has no choice but to believe you.
Number 3, execute a mission. If you are feeling lost, bored, or depressed, and this goes double for the single men listening, stop sitting in circles talking about your feelings. Abandon the soft communities. Find a group, whether that is a church, a business venture, or a local physical organization, that has a defined, actionable mission that carries real-world consequences. Demand an assignment where your failure actually matters.
Those are critical, structural steps for navigating the chaos. To everyone listening, we barely scratched the surface of these topics. We highly encourage you to check the original sources linked in the show notes below.
Go read the history of the communes. Go listen to the full theology debates, read the economic data for yourself, and see if our conclusions hold up.
And please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this deep dive with someone who needs to hear it. The algorithms are built by the very tech companies we critique today. They aren't going to promote this for us. You sharing the show is the only way we keep bringing you these deep dives.
I will leave you with this final provocative thought. If an anthropologist from 100 years in the future were to dig up your life right now, if they looked at your bank statements, your screen time data, your daily routines, and the specific things you willingly sacrifice your comfort for, what religion would they conclude you actually belong to? Because whatever you are signaling the most cost toward is the altar you are truly worshiping at.